Hi there everyone, I'm Aisha Sindhu and you are watching Gravitas, the show where we bring you various perspectives on the day's top stories. On the big discussion tonight though, it's been 45 years since the 1971 Indo-Pak War that liberated Bangladesh from Pakistan. As the country celebrates its 46th Victory Day, we look at how Bangladesh has changed since its formation and talk about whether there has been any change at all. We have a power-packed panel on hand for our discussion. From Dhaka, we are joined by WION's Bangladesh Bureau Chief Saad Hamadi and by historian and journalist Afsan Chaudhry. Bangladesh analyst Shantanu Mukherjee also joins in from New Delhi. But first up, the country that secured its independence through an armed struggle against Pakistani forces in 1971 was born out of racial, social and economic marginalization. But 45 years later, has the country made a difference for its citizens? WION's Bangladesh Bureau Chief Saad Hamadi filed this report.
In 1947, the division of the Indian subcontinent was based on religious identities of Hindus and Muslims. Bangladesh, which was East Pakistan until 1971, was born out of not just religion but also socio-cultural identity and diversity. The country soared on the principles of democracy, nationalism, socialism and secularism. But 45 years later, has the country been able to live up to those promises?
Even now, the majority of the people believe in secularism and democracy. They also support socialism. And there are few political parties who try to provoke, create disruption, create communal distrust and clashes. Jamaat-e-Islami, which was against our liberation struggle, they are still provoking trouble in Bangladesh and they are taking up a communal agenda. But they are not supported by the people.
A Muslim-majority country, Bangladesh has seen its political parties largely divided between Islamism and secular values. A country born out of marginalization has its own religious and national minorities marginalized. So what is the country composed of?
We have created a situation where people think that money and property is God. So they want to get the money in different ways, by corruption, by arms smuggling, by smuggling narcotics and other things. All ways to earn money, business and everything. So these people, they want to grab the property of the religious minorities. And you will see the attacks are not only on the religious minorities, but also on national minorities. So minorities and the weaker section. And in the villages among the Muslims also, poor people, their land is being grabbed by rich people.
The global rise of terrorism and a democratic void have inspired radical elements within Bangladesh to gain traction and make the country unstable. The youth in Bangladesh represents more than 60% of the country's population. That gives Bangladesh a tremendous opportunity as much as a challenge if not nurtured well. In Dhaka, with video journalist Gholam Rabbi, this is Saad Hamadi for WION.
Okay, let's get the conversation started. We're going to go to Saad first. Saad, your story says that Bangladesh is largely divided between secular values and Islamism. Where then does the country stand as of today?
Well, it's been 45 years, and if you look at the youths in Bangladesh, they're very vibrant and it's evolving in a very vibrant atmosphere. But going into the political spectrum, if we look at the constitution of Bangladesh, there lies a strong contradiction in what is in the principle of Bangladesh and what the constitution states. By the constitutional norm, the country has a state religion, which is Islam. But the principles of which the pillars for constitution stands in Bangladesh says it believes in the values of secularism, nationalism, socialism, and democracy. Now that is a clear contradiction between state religion and what the principles stand for.
All right, so clearly there seems to be somewhat of a paradox at play over here. Let's go to Mr. Afsan Chaudhry now. He joins us also from Dhaka. So where exactly do you feel Bangladesh stands in terms of its Islamic identity on this day of its 45th year of independence, pardon me? And do you feel there is an internal confusion at play when it comes to the Islamic identity in Bangladesh?
No, I don't think so. I've been studying faith practices and faith identities for the last 2 years, and it's clear that if there's one identity, it's that people living in a social situation. So people may say I'm a Muslim, or they may say I'm a Hindu, but if you explore or go in depth, you find out his ideas are all social. So he does not have a conventional understood religious identity. Most of these ideas about secularism and all that, and my history research shows that this is a very elitist concept, idea of secularism. I spent most of my life doing research in 1971, and in villages there is no religion. I'm sure the situation is all over South Asia the same. So essentially people lead a social life. They go and visit each other's social activities, religious activities. Religion is not a theological concept in Bangladesh. Religion, it's a social concept. People who want to use religion, and these are mostly the politicians, they do so. If you look at the last 5 years, tracking down all the hotspots where there have been communal disturbances, you will find almost all of them are led by political leaders. So
right.
Even the recent one, Nasir Nagar, it was because of the internal conflict within the ruling party. So I think, putting the blame and saying there's a conflict between religious and secularists is mostly an upper class issue, or maximum maybe a middle class issue. I don't think it affects ordinary people at all.
Okay, let's get Mr. Shantanu Mukherjee in on the conversation and get his thoughts. Let's have you react, Mr. Mukherjee, to what Mr. Chaudhary just said. He says that religion is social and not a theological concept in Bangladesh. Would you agree?
Well, I agree largely with him, his assessment. I've lived in Bangladesh, I've dealt Bangladesh from the government of India at a responsible position. It's a highly secular and a forward-thinking country with lots of hope and promise. And on that note, I'm very optimistic about it. Like every country, it's polarized. There are Islamic, pro-Islamic elements, but by and large, it's very progressive. The society is very progressive. You have the Hindu functions. You have Tagore as their national poet there. The national anthem is adopted of a Hindu there. You see the Poila Baishakh, or the 1st of April, the New Year, which is much more vibrant and robust when compared to West Bengal. So there are secular credentials very much active in Bangladesh, which keeps it going. As far as Islamic elements are there, we need not be flustered by here and there 1 or 2 bomb attacks and everything. The Nasir Nagar, this previous gentleman who commented on that, these are local issues. These are not a national or state sponsored. These are local issues. The goons want to grab the property. It's a law and order issue. But on the whole, Bangladesh does have hope, because equal number, though it's a Muslim majority country, though the minority will suffer a bit, not by compulsion, but by circumstances. We have seen during Pakistan time also it had suffered. But the country is surging forward. We have got a leader there who is very forward thinking, who wants to do good for the Hindus, enjoys a good Hindu vote bank. So I don't I'm not upset about it that it is going to the dogs or it is going to be completely Islamist. Yes, the terrorist acts in the recent past, which is completely a thing to be dealt by the intelligence and counterintelligence agencies, the counter-terror agencies.
Right.
It's a global phenomenon. Bangladesh cannot be isolated in that and can be dismissed just because Bangladesh is not secular, it is not protecting Hindus or not protecting, it's certainly not.
Sure.
There are here and there snatches and pieces, keep things happening, but we must continue with that. Am I clear?
All right. Interesting points being brought up by all our guests there in terms of what the Islamic identity really is in Bangladesh. But let's now turn our attention to an interview with writer, journalist and filmmaker Shahryar Kabir. WION's editor-in-chief Rohit Gandhi spoke with Mr. Kabir a few days ago about the painful times that led to the creation of Bangladesh. Take a look.
Thank you for joining us for Straight Talk, Mr. Shahryar Kabir. Let's talk about your latest film, Journey to Justice.
Well, it's a sequel of my previous film. Earlier I made War Crime 71, and this one is also on the genocide of 1971. During the liberation war of Bangladesh, 3 million people were being killed and more than 200,000 women were violated, and 10 million people took shelter in India, forced to leave Bangladesh. And that was a huge genocide. But unfortunately, most of the Western countries, they do not recognize the Bangladesh genocide because of the Pakistani narratives. You know, since day one, Pakistan is telling there was no genocide, and it was a civil war, and both sides is vulnerable.
Why does the Western world miss this narrative and actually push the Pakistani narrative? Explain that to me a bit.
You have to look into the situation of 1971. It was a Cold War era. And at that time, you know, America and the Western countries, including China, they were with Pakistan. They were supporting Pakistani military junta at that time. While they are committing genocide in Bangladesh, they just kept mum, all the governments, you know. But on the contrary, you know, India and small countries like Nepal and Bhutan initially, you know, stood by Bangladesh. And later we got Soviet Union with us, Soviet Union and East European countries. But government, they have their own agendas, you know, because of the Cold War policy, you know, Cold War situation. Since Soviet Union was supporting Bangladesh, and that's why America and the Western powers and China, they were supporting Pakistan. So that was the situation. That is the main reason.
What can the world community do?
They must put a strong pressure on Pakistan government, because it is very interesting. One Western scholar, you know, Professor Ben Kiernan of Yale University, he said he linked with the impunity of Bangladesh genocide with the rise of Al-Qaeda. He said it categorically, that those generals who committed genocide in Bangladesh in 1971, they got impunity, and later they became so powerful, they controlled everything in Pakistan, the politics, the economy, society, everything was controlled by them. And at the end of the day, those generals were responsible for creation of Al-Qaeda. So they have, Professor Kiernan linked rise of Al-Qaeda with the impunity of Bangladesh genocides. So if you mean business, if you want to win the war on terror, definitely there should be a strong pressure on Pakistan.
You've been thrown in jail.
Well, in 2001, when Jamaat-e-Islami assumed power with the help of BNP, you know, there we have seen unprecedented persecution on the Hindus and the secular democratic political forces, and we protested that. And as a result, I was put behind the bar, tortured a couple of times. But because of the pressure from the international community, Amnesty International declared me prisoner of conscience, and United Nations also protested. So I was released, I got bailed, but I had to fight, you know, keep on fighting, you know, because of the plight, because persecution of the religious minorities is still going on.
Pakistan left in 1971, but its ties and its want to be still some way involved in Bangladesh continues to stay on. Explain to me why were the ties not entirely snapped, and why has Pakistan still not let go?
Yes, the problem with the defeat of 1971, that was the most humiliating defeat, military defeat they've suffered since the inception of Pakistan. And since 72, what we are watching, the agent of Pakistan, Jamaat-e-Islami or Muslim League or Nizam-e-Islam, those extreme rightist fanatics parties, though they were banned constitutionally, but they were quite active in underground, you know. They continued their clandestine activities. And even behind the killing of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and those other leaders who led the liberation war. So definitely ISI was very much involved with that, and many Western researchers also explained how ISI and CIA were involved with the killing of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and other secular democratic leaders. And Pakistani agents are still active. So that's why, you know, as I said, that most of the time Bangladesh, that is the most unfortunate part of the history of Bangladesh, that this country, most of the time, Bangladesh was ruled by pro-Pakistanis.
There seems to be a lot of influence of the jihadists, if you want to call them that, or terrorists in Bangladesh, back and forth. Al-Qaeda has been involved, IS has been involved. Explain to me, how is that allowed to be seeped into something that was supposed to be a secular democracy?
If you look into the history of Bangladesh, traditionally, the Bangladeshi society, it is very much secular, very much liberal, and both the major faiths, you know, Hindus and Muslims, lived with peace and amity for many hundreds, several hundred years. But because since the inception of this, Jamaat-e-Islami in South Asia, we have seen a worst expression of political Islam that justified jihad in the name of Islam, killing other faith, killing other people who do not share their views of Islam. So they justified that killing, even the killing of 3 million people in 1971. And since then, this rise of Islamic militancy, we are watching not only in Bangladesh, across the world, there is a rise of rightism. And if you want to explain this victory of President Trump, again, that reflects the rise of rightism, or extreme views are rising everywhere, from Turkey to Indonesia. Everywhere you can watch that secular democracy is losing its ground.
Blood, sweat and tears led to Bangladesh's liberation. I'd like to pick up on one thought from what Mr. Kabir said there when it comes to the genocide and it never being acknowledged by the world, at least not in the way perhaps it should have been. Mr. Mukherjee, why do you think that the genocide of 71 was never really acknowledged in the international media as much as it should have been perhaps?
Well, that's most unfortunate. West has a very jaundiced view, very prejudiced view about things happening in this part of the world. When after the Jews' Holocaust, there were Nuremberg trials. There were huge hue and cry, and everything was delved into and probed very deeply. But Bangladesh, according to Bangladesh, there were casualties about 300,000. And like Mr. Shahryar Kabir said, so many women's honor were violated. But have they been looked into? Very recently, there was an UN move under Western behest to bring down the numbers, that is very high and that cannot be. Why can't an atrocity or anything perpetrated in this part of the world, in South Asia, be less genocidal as compared to the West? This is their very, very biased view. So they would not like it. When Bangladesh held its election in 2009, the West refused to recognize it.
Right.
Why? Because the discrimination continues there. As simple as that.
Mr.
So
Chaudhary?
therefore, they are, sorry.
Right. Sorry to interrupt you there. I'd like to go
Yes.
across to Mr. Chaudhary
Who
as
are
well.
you posing this question to?
I'm coming across to you, Mr. Chaudhary. Now, on your thoughts as far as the genocide goes, are you in agreement that it went largely ignored by the world at that point of time and continues to be in today's scenario?
Well, in my opinion, what the West does or doesn't do is not really something that interests me a great deal. But I'm more interested in finding out what happened here. In our whole construction of national history, we do leave out people, and have been doing a series on these left outs of history. For example, if you look at what the Hindu community suffered in 71, and you do not see it being mentioned as the most significant point of this genocide. You also need to actually explore how people died, and if you want to play numbers game, then you have to actually go out and search and find, like the Ved Vasham, find the numbers, the addresses of people who were killed. But rather than that, this whole debate has taken on a political space. So people argue about, the government says 3 million and the opposition says no, not so many, and now the government is passing a law saying that no, anybody who questions this will be put behind bars. I don't think as a historian, I would like to go about doing this matter this way. I would like to go and explore the history. But people are more interested or concerned about pushing through a number and then saying, what does the West accept? My interest in the West is very limited. I've never studied in the West. Perhaps that is why my respect is limited. I would like for myself and for our generations to know what really happened in 71. And I believe we only focus on those issues which helps our politics rather than helps understand our own history.
All right, let's continue that thought then about political parties in Bangladesh. Mr. Chaudhary, do you feel that the dissidence then between the BNP and the Awami League have also allowed radicalism to thrive in Bangladesh?
No, I don't think the radicals have tried. There may be Jamaat-e-Islami may have radicals, but Jamaat-e-Islami has a limited number of votes. People overdo the Jamaat-e-Islami thing. They have never had more than 3 to 4% votes, ever. So how is it that such a major force? I think Awami League is way out the most popular political party. But Awami League and BNP and Awami League, Jamaat-e-Islami went together in 2001. And they won the election, and they put in a lot of people. Those of us who were protesting, we certainly felt it was an extremely wrong thing to do, a terrible thing to do. Jamaat-e-Islami is a party of traitors. How can you sit down with people who have committed treason? But politics in Bangladesh is such that these things happen. So I would say Jamaat-e-Islami or extremists are perhaps linked, but I think the extremism is a very minor phenomenon. If you look at the history of extremism in the world, and I study extremism, it is linked to nationalist movements. Even in your own country, if you look at the extremist movement, it's linked to nationalist movements. If it is not, it will disappear. And that is why I think Bangladesh does not have a very serious terrorist threat or extremist threat in politics. Bangladesh has other extremisms, including economic extremism. But Bangladesh politically does not have such a big threat. But of course, they come and kill. Now, if you look at when the bloggers were being killed, the very ordinary people were being killed, the government wasn't moving. Government moved when the foreigners were killed.
Sure.
So clearly, the ruling class is not as interested in its own people as it's interested in the foreigners.
All right. Pertinent points being brought up by all our guests there. Unfortunately, we're going to take a quick break right now because we have to. But on the other side, we're going to have the Pakistan perspective and how youngsters in that country are responding to Bangladesh's independence 45 years later. Stay with WION.